In a courtroom filled with watchful eyes, where every word spoken could change entire destinies, sat the man everyone believed guilty. Daniel Hahn, a millionaire known for his cold-blooded business dealings and the empire he'd built over the years. Headlines plastered his face in bold letters, accusing him of corruption, hidden plots, and crimes he swore he never committed. Television cameras broadcast every detail, and public opinion seemed to have already decreed his sentence before the judge even raised his gavel. With each fabricated testimony, each forged document, the weight on Daniel grew, and the shadow of conviction seemed almost inevitable. But what no one knew was that the truth was about to be revealed unexpectedly, not by powerful lawyers or politicians, but by someone they never imagined, a young girl who held the key to unraveling the entire farce. The atmosphere was suffocating. The walls of the courtroom seemed to narrow with the pressure of the prosecution's lawyers, each intent on reinforcing Daniel's image as the villain of the story. The judge, serious, watched the proceedings while the audience murmured, eager for the spectacle. But in the back of that room, among the crowded benches, there was a discreet presence. Clara, a teenager with a steady gaze and a still unfamiliar voice. She knew the whole truth because she had witnessed secret meetings, overheard hidden conversations, and more than that, she had evidence that no one dared to reveal. Clara possessed the courage that many adults had lost, and she was willing to face not only the system, but also the corrupt elite that sought to destroy an innocent man to protect their own interests. The fate of that hearing seemed sealed. Daniel would be convicted, corruption would once again go unpunished, and the true culprits would remain free. But when Clara stood and asked to speak, a deathly silence fell over the room. Eyes turned to that simple girl, and no one imagined that from her lips would come the revelation capable of turning the tide. It was the clash between innocence and malice, between courage and manipulation. A scene that would show that often the truth comes from where least expected. This is the story of how a young woman's courage managed to challenge the powerful and change the course of a trial that seemed lost. Before we dive into this surprising plot, tell me from which city in Brazil you are watching us. Leave a comment and I will respond with gratitude. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and like this video. This will help the story reach more people and ensure you don't miss any of the exciting lessons we have to share. The judgment announced. The sun rose timidly amid the heavy clouds that hung over the city, as if even the sky sensed the weight of the day to come. This was no ordinary trial. The streets surrounding the courthouse were packed with reporters, cameramen, and curious onlookers thronging to get a glimpse, even a distant one, of the man who would be led into the courtroom. Daniel Hahn, a millionaire who for years had been a symbol of success, was about to face the toughest test of his life. Accused of corruption, embezzlement, and even money laundering, he had become easy fodder for sensational headlines. The news was full of adjectives: fallen tycoon, the empire of shame, from fortune to prison. Everyone was ready to see him crumble, and few bothered to question whether the accusations were actually true. The courthouse entrance seemed like a spectacle. Cameras flashed incessantly, journalists shouted questions, and security guards had to clear a path through the crowd so Daniel could pass. He walked with a serious expression, impeccably suited, but with a heavy gaze, like someone carrying more than the pressure of a sentence. He carried the pain of seeing his name, his history, and his legacy reduced to dust. Many believed this would be merely a formality, that in a few hours the verdict would be ready, sealing the fate of the man who had for so long been a symbol of ambition. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was no less suffocating. The benches were packed, divided between onlookers, journalists, and figures from the political and business elite, eagerly awaiting to witness Daniel's downfall. It was almost as if everyone was there to celebrate a cruel spectacle. The judge, a man with an austere expression, took notes as he observed the proceedings. The prosecution, led by relentless lawyers, already had an air of anticipated victory. The evidence presented seemed overwhelming: signed documents, million-dollar transfers, and even witnesses who, with firm voices, pointed to Daniel as the one behind shady schemes. But what few knew was that the truth was far from so simple. Daniel had always been a tough businessman, but never corrupt. Many of those documents were falsified. Testimonies had been bought, and the entire trial was nothing more than a carefully planned, staged attempt to bring him down. The reason was clear. Daniel was a nuisance. His independence and his refusal to submit to certain political alliances made him a target. For many powerful figures, he was a thorn in their side that needed to be removed. And the court, instead of being a stage for justice, had become the perfect arena to cover up the corruption of real criminals. As the prosecution paraded their supposed evidence, Daniel remained silent, watching everything with a steady gaze. He knew that, at that moment, any misplaced word could be used against him. His lawyer did his best to dismantle the arguments, but it was like fighting an ocean with his bare hands. Every witness seemed rehearsed, every document presented at just the right moment to reinforce the image of a ruthless and unscrupulous man. For the audience, the sentence had already been passed. It was only a matter of time before the judge's gavel fell, condemning Daniel to lose not only his fortune, but also his freedom. At the back of the room, almost unnoticed among so many important figures, stood Clara, a young woman of only 17, dressed simply and with a reserved demeanor. Her eyes, however, carried an intensity that belied her appearance. Clara knew the whole truth. She had witnessed conversations in dark corridors, had heard whispered threats among those who now occupied the role of accusers. More than that, Clara had hidden evidence that could turn the entire trial upside down, but she also knew that if she spoke, she would put herself at risk. It was a decision that required more courage than many of the adults there ever had. Clara's heart pounded as she listened to the prosecution speak. Each lie uttered aloud felt like a blow to her. She knew Daniel was innocent, and she also knew that the true culprits sat in positions of prestige, disguised as defenders of justice. She looked at Daniel, and for a moment, he seemed to notice her too. Their eyes met briefly, and in that gaze, Clara saw something no one else noticed. A man who, despite all his wealth, was completely alone. Time seemed to be running out for Daniel. With every passing minute, the prosecution's narrative grew stronger, and even the judge began to show signs of impatience. For those present, the outcome was inevitable. But Clara, deep down, knew that the inevitable only happens when no one has the courage to change the course of history. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. The decision she was about to make could risk her life, but it could also save an innocent man from ruin. At that moment, unbeknownst to anyone, the fate of the trial began to change. And the key to this transformation lay in the hands of a girl no one expected to see as the protagonist, the voice that no one expected. The courtroom was already immersed in an atmosphere of anticipated sentencing. Every word of the accusation was received as if it were indisputable, and the audience murmured in approval as if there were no room for doubt. Daniel Hahn remained motionless, but inside, he felt the crushing weight of injustice. It was like being trapped in a carefully planned trap, where even hope seemed to be about to abandon him. His lawyer tried, with technical arguments, to point out inconsistencies in the testimony, but it was clear to no avail. Everything was set up to convict the millionaire without a chance to defend himself. At the back of the room, Clara watched in silence. Her hands were sweating, and her heart was pounding so hard it seemed to echo within her. She knew no one there expected to hear her voice, To everyone, she was just an ordinary, unimportant girl, lost in the crowd. But inside her, an uncontrollable flame was growing, indignation at the lies. Clara had seen documents being forged, overheard clandestine conversations, and above all had kept messages that revealed the plot against Daniel. It wasn't just a matter of choice, it was a matter of justice. And even though her voice was fragile in the face of so many powerful figures, she knew it needed to be heard. As another witness testified against Daniel, Clara stood. The discreet creaking of the bench drew little attention at first, but soon eyes began to turn in her direction. The judge frowned in surprise, and the prosecution looked on with disdain, as if annoyed by an untimely interruption. Clara took a deep breath and said, her voice still trembling but firm enough to echo throughout the room, "Excuse me, Your Honor, I need to speak." Silence fell over the courtroom. It was as if time had stopped. The judge, initially irritated, responded sternly, "Young man, this is not allowed. This is a serious court. Return to your seat." But Clara didn't back down. Her fixed gaze showed that this wasn't just a teenage whim. "With all due respect, Your Excellency, I have proof that this man is innocent, and if you don't listen to me, injustice will prevail today." Her words fell like a bombshell in the room. Murmurs filled the audience. Journalists quickly began typing on their computers, and cameras turned to capture this unexpected moment. The prosecution, uncomfortable, tried to hush up the situation. One of the lawyers stood up and said mockingly, "Your Honor, we cannot allow a child to disrupt such an important process. This is a waste of time." But Clara was undeterred. Holding a folder tightly in her hands, she stepped forward. "I'm not a child, and what I have here can prove everyone wrong." The judge, visibly pressured by the stares and the atmosphere that was building, took a deep breath. He knew that ignoring the young woman would seem too authoritarian, especially in front of the cameras. After a few seconds of reflection, he said, "Very well, bring what you have here. But know that if it's just an unfounded interruption, you will be held accountable." Clara walked to the front, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the room. Her heart felt like it was about to burst, but each step was fueled by courage. She handed the file to the judge, and in a voice firmer than ever declared, "Here are messages, recordings, and documents that show how everything was manipulated. Powerful people wanted to destroy Daniel Han to protect their own interests. I saw it, I heard it, and I kept it all." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge looked at the papers with a serious expression, while the prosecution's lawyers desperately tried to argue that the whole thing was nothing more than fabrications. But Clara's courage had completely changed the course of the trial. It was no longer just the prosecution's word against the defense. Now, there was a new piece on the board, unexpected and powerful. Daniel watched with a mixture of shock and hope. For the first time in weeks, he felt someone truly believed in him. His eyes filled with unshed tears as he realized that this young woman, who didn't even know him personally, was willing to risk everything to defend the truth. It was as if a light had pierced the suffocating darkness surrounding him. Clara took a deep breath and concluded, "If justice really exists, then the time has come to show the truth." And at that moment, everyone understood that the trial that seemed decided was just beginning. The Battle of the Trials. The courtroom, which until minutes ago had seemed determined to convict Daniel Han, was now teeming with tension. The murmurs were incessant. Camera flashes lit up the room like lightning in a storm, and all eyes were fixed on an unlikely figure. Clara, the young woman who had dared to interrupt the trial and present a folder full of documents. That scene, which had seemed straight out of a movie, was now a reality. The judge, visibly surprised, quickly leafed through the pages handed to him. His expression, previously rigid and impassive, began to reveal signs of doubt. Meanwhile, the prosecution lawyers wasted no time. One of them, a middle-aged man with a deep voice and an arrogant posture, stood up immediately. "Your Honor, this is absurd. This young woman has no standing to intervene in a trial of this magnitude. What she has brought is nothing but fabrications. You cannot allow a child to disrupt a serious proceeding like this." But Clara was undaunted. Even in the presence of powerful and experienced men, she kept her eyes fixed on the judge. Her voice, now firm, rang out throughout the room. "With all due respect, Your Excellency, these are not fabrications. This evidence shows that documents were falsified and that witnesses were paid to lie. I was present when these conversations took place. I heard and recorded everything." The audience, increasingly intrigued, murmured incessantly. Some looked disbelieving, others hopeful. Journalists typed frantically, knowing they were facing a twist that could make headlines the next day. The judge, trying to regain control of the room, banged his gavel. "Order in court!" His voice echoed firmly. "What's at stake here is the validity of this evidence. We'll need to analyze it rigorously." Daniel, sitting in the dock, watched intently. For the first time since the trial began, he felt like he might have a chance. He looked at Clara and discreetly nodded in gratitude. It was a simple gesture, but charged with emotion. An acknowledgement that, even without knowing him personally, she had stood up to defend him when everyone condemned him. The prosecution, in turn, began to attack with ferocity. "Your Honor, this young woman has no technical training, no legal credibility. We cannot allow the trial to be based on gossip or illegally obtained recordings." Clara then opened her backpack and took out a small recorder. With steady hands, she handed it to the judge. "This isn't gossip. These are recordings of meetings where executives and politicians planned to bring down Daniel Hahn. Here are recognizable voices, dates, locations. Everything is verifiable." Silence fell over the courtroom again. The judge, intrigued, ordered the equipment tested. A technician was summoned, and minutes later, audio began echoing through the courtroom speakers. The unmistakable voices spoke of doctoring documents, buying witnesses, and turning Daniel into a scapegoat to protect the truly guilty. The words in the audio were devastating. "If we destroy his reputation, we will open the way for our own projects. He must be convicted, whatever the cost. Don't worry, I already have witnesses who will tell us exactly what we need." The judge will swallow it. Each sentence was like a bomb exploding in the heart of the courtroom. People, previously convinced of Daniel's guilt, now looked at each other in shock. Some in attendance covered their mouths with their hands in disbelief. Journalists nearly fell over each other trying to capture every detail. The prosecution fell into despair. One of the lawyers stood up, trying to muffle the impact. "This is illegal. This recording is worthless." But the judge, with a stern look, retorted, "What is valuable or not will be decided here. And so far, what we have heard is too serious to be ignored." Daniel felt his heart race. It was as if, after weeks of darkness, a ray of light had finally opened before him. With each word that emerged from the audio recordings, the deception against him unraveled, revealing the true culprits. Clara, despite her courage, was beginning to feel the weight of the pressure. She knew that by exposing all of this, she was challenging very powerful people. Her eyes revealed fear, but also determination. She knew that backing down now would mean condemning an innocent man. It was at that moment that Daniel's father, sitting discreetly among the attendees, stood up and hurried out of the room, talking on the phone. It was clear that the content of the recordings was panicking the corrupt elite. The game had changed. Still, the judge could not make an immediate decision. "We will need to analyze the full authenticity of this evidence. But given what has been presented, this court cannot simply ignore the allegations of manipulation. I will adjourn the session for today so that everything can be examined." As the decision fell, commotion was inevitable. Journalists rushed to the exit to broadcast the news of the turnaround live. People stood up, arguing among themselves, and the room became a whirlwind of voices. Daniel remained seated, stunned, but with an expression of hope he hadn't shown in a long time. Clara returned to her seat, and for the first time, she felt the impact of what she had done. She was trembling, but also relieved. She had managed to break the wall of silence surrounding this trial. As she passed Daniel, he inclined his head discreetly and murmured, "Thank you. You saved my life today." Clara just smiled, but in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. The court had been shaken, but the powerful men trying to destroy Daniel wouldn't give up so easily. They had influence, resources, and a ruthless desire to keep their hands clean in the public eye. And Clara was now a direct threat to that system. That night, as headlines blared, "Young woman interrupts trial, reveals manipulation," and "Daniel Han case twisted," she returned home knowing she had become a target. But when she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw not a frightened girl, but a young woman who had found her mission, to fight for the truth no matter the cost. The retaliation of the powerful news of the court's reversal spread like wildfire. Headlines dominated the news. Talk shows discussed every detail of Clara's recordings, and social media filled with comments about the young woman's courage. The girl who stood up to the system, the voice of justice, the unexpected heroine. These were some of the titles circulating, but while she had become a symbol of hope for the public, for the powerful who plotted against Daniel Han, Clara had become a serious problem, a risk that needed to be silenced. The next morning, Clara noticed the first signs of retaliation. As she left the house, she noticed a black car parked across the street. Inside, two men in dark suits were watching her with hard eyes. At first, she tried to convince herself it was just a coincidence, but as she walked to school, she realized the car was following her discreetly. Her heart raced, and for the first time, she felt the true weight of facing such dangerous people. Still, he didn't back down. Clara knew that if she gave up now, all the courage she'd mustered the day before would have been in vain. Meanwhile, Daniel was also suffering the consequences. His company, already rocked by the accusations, began losing contracts en masse. Longtime partners, pressured by corrupt politicians, broke off agreements. His assets were temporarily frozen by the courts, and his employees faced uncertainty about their futures. Everything indicated that, even if Clara's evidence were accepted, Daniel's enemies would do everything they could to destroy his life. However, he was undeterred. For the first time in weeks, he had an unexpected ally. A young woman who had risked everything to defend the truth. The judge, under pressure from all sides, ordered the evidence presented to be examined by independent experts. This process would take several days, and during that time, the accusers had only one goal: to discredit Clara. Interviews appeared in the newspapers insinuating that she was being manipulated, that her evidence had been planted, even that her mental health was fragile and that she could not be taken seriously. It was an orchestrated campaign to destroy her image and silence her voice. But Clara wasn't alone. Some honest journalists began investigating the clues she had presented, finding evidence that supported her recordings. Ordinary people, inspired by her courage, began sending messages of support, defending her on social media. What was supposed to be an attempt at intimidation turned into an even larger movement. The fight for truth was gaining momentum. Despite this, the risks were real. One rainy night, as Clara was returning home, two men tried to approach her on a deserted street. Fear gripped her, but before she could be surrounded, a police car suddenly appeared, driving the suspects away. Clara realized she was living in an invisible war, where every step could be her last. Still, she determined not to back down. She knew that Daniel's life and the chance to expose all the corruption depended on her courage. In court, tension only increased. The judge received initial reports confirming that some of Clara's evidence was legitimate. The recordings were authentic, the documents were true. This left the accusers desperate. They tried to postpone the trial, request more time, and raise funds, all to try to gain momentum. But the public pressure was already too strong, and the court could no longer ignore the case. Daniel, seeing all this, began to change as well. Until then, he had always been a cold man, accustomed to dealing with figures and business. But Clara's courage inspired him to be different. He realized that his fight was not just for himself, but for all those who had been victims of injustice. In a private conversation with her, he said, "Clara, you didn't just save my life. You showed me that I need to use everything I have to fight for justice. If I emerge victorious from this, it won't just be my acquittal, but the beginning of something much bigger." Clara smiled, still scared, but convinced. "What matters is that the truth comes out. I won't stop, no matter what they try." This determination moved Daniel. He knew the upcoming trial would not only be about his innocence, but about revealing the true face of the corruption that governed that city. As the day for the trial to resume approached, the entire town seemed to hold its breath. It would be the decisive moment. The accusers were more aggressive than ever, willing to do anything to silence Clara. But she, alongside Daniel, was ready to face whatever came her way. Deep down, everyone knew that the next day in court wouldn't be just a hearing. It would be a battle between truth and lies, courage and manipulation, justice and corruption. And this time, everyone's fate rested in the hands of a young woman who had become the voice no one could ignore. The outcome of truth. The morning of the final trial dawned with a heavy air. It wasn't just another hearing. It was the day that would decide Daniel Han's fate, and with it, society's trust in a judicial system shaken by corruption. Outside the courthouse, the crowd was larger than ever. People carried signs with slogans like "Justice for all" and "No more corruption." Journalists had been broadcasting live since early morning, while commentators spoke of the trial of the century. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was even more charged. Every look, every gesture, every silence seemed to foreshadow that something historic was about to happen. Daniel entered accompanied by his lawyer. Unlike in previous hearings, he didn't seem bowed by the weight of injustice. There was a new glow in his eyes, a quiet strength. He knew he wasn't free yet, but he also knew he was no longer alone. Across the room, sitting firmly, was Clara. The young woman, with her serious expression and simple posture, seemed to carry the weight of an entire nation on her shoulders. She had defied powerful men and lived to tell the tale. Now, her courage would be tested once again. The judge began the session with his deep voice. "Today, we will continue the trial of defendant Daniel Han. The evidence presented by young Clara has been examined, and the court will analyze the results. I ask for order and seriousness, as what is decided here will have a profound impact." The prosecution was the first to speak. One of the lawyers, trying to maintain his composure, argued, "Your Honor, even if some of the recordings are legitimate, we must remember that they were obtained unofficially. We cannot build a case based on evidence that technically violates privacy. If we accept this, we will set a dangerous precedent." But this time, the argument didn't seem so solid. The judge replied, "What's at stake here is more than technicalities. We're talking about the possibility that an entire trial was manipulated. The authenticity of the evidence is undeniable, and this court cannot turn a blind eye to it." When it was the defense's turn, Daniel's lawyer asked for Clara to be formally heard. The judge allowed it, and everyone's hearts raced. Clara walked to the center of the courtroom. Her hands trembled, but her voice, firm, echoed, "I'm not here to make money. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a politician. I'm not wealthy. I'm just someone who saw the truth and couldn't live in peace, knowing that an innocent man would be condemned for lies." She then described in detail how she witnessed secret meetings, how she kept hidden recordings, and how she decided, despite her fear, to gather everything to present in court. With each word, the audience's attention grew. It was impossible not to hear the sincerity in her voice. One of the prosecution's lawyers tried to interrupt her. "This young lady is making it up. She doesn't have enough evidence." Clara then took a deep breath and replied, "If I didn't have proof, I wouldn't be here. And if I were lying, why would powerful men be trying to intimidate me? Why have I received threats? Because they're afraid of the truth." At this point, she presented new recordings she had kept secret, fearing they would be destroyed if released earlier. The audios clearly mentioned the names of prominent politicians, discussing strategies to use Daniel as a scapegoat. The voices spoke of figures, blackmail, and how they needed to silence any inconvenient witnesses. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The prosecution's lawyers were pale. The judge, in turn, called for silence and ordered the audio files to be analyzed by the technicians present. Minutes later, confirmation came. The files were legitimate, with no signs of tampering. In light of this, the judge announced, "This court cannot ignore what it has heard. From this moment on, I order an immediate investigation of the individuals named in these recordings." It was the turning point everyone had been waiting for. The prosecutors, who had previously controlled the proceedings, were now cornered. Some tried to leave the courtroom but were stopped by security guards. Daniel, sitting in the dock, couldn't hold back his tears. For the first time, justice was beginning to lean in his favor. The prosecution, in its final attempt at defense, tried to argue that Daniel might still be involved, that it might all be a setup. But the judge was categorical. The evidence presented against the defendant proved to be fabricated: false documents, sold witnesses, and clear manipulation. I not only drop the charges against Daniel Hahn, but I also order an investigation of those who participated in this conspiracy. The room erupted. People rose to their feet applauding. Journalists broadcast live, calling the moment the fall of the mighty. Clara, overcome with emotion, couldn't hold back her tears. She had won, not for herself, but for the truth. Daniel stood up and walked over to her. In front of everyone, he took her hands and said, "You gave me my life back. I don't know how to thank you, but know that what you did today will echo forever." Clara replied, still crying, "I only did what was right." But for the public, that gesture was symbolic. The wrongly accused millionaire and the simple young woman who dared to confront the system stood side by side, united by courage and truth. Outside, the crowd celebrated. The press reported the victory as a historic milestone. But above all, what spread was the hope that justice could still prevail, even in the face of the greatest corruption. In the following days, investigations were opened against powerful politicians and business people. Many lost their jobs, others were arrested, and the entire country began discussing changes to the justice system. Daniel, although he had regained his freedom, knew he could never be the same again. He decided to use his influence and resources not only to rebuild his life, but to support social justice causes, helping young people like Clara find a voice. In a television interview, when asked what he had learned from all of this, Daniel replied, "I always believed that power was in money. Today, I learned that true power lies in the courage to tell the truth." Clara, in turn, returned to her simple life, but was never the same. She became an inspiration to thousands of young people who realized that even without wealth or influence, it was possible to make a difference. She received invitations to give lectures, was honored in schools, and became a symbol of resistance against injustice. Daniel Han's case went down in history as the trial that nearly destroyed an innocent man, but also revealed the unexpected strength of an ordinary girl. And above all, it showed that when the truth is exposed, not even the most powerful can resist forever. In the final scene of that journey, Daniel and Clara walked out of the courtroom together, surrounded by applause. He, the millionaire who had regained not only his freedom, but also his humanity. She, the young woman who had made the impossible a reality, and together they proved that when someone has the courage to stand up, even the greatest empires of lies can crumble before the force of truth.